Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why some workplaces just absolutely hum with energy and loyalty, while others are constantly cracking under all these unseen tensions and resentments? It's really easy to just write that off as workplace culture or, abstract feelings. But what if I told you that those invisible dynamics of loyalty, trust, and even betrayal are actually structured, measurable phenomena? Today, we're going to make the invisible visible. We are going to explore the literal architecture of trust within an organization, looking at the actual structural systems you can manage and measure to build a truly thriving workplace. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the psychological contract, move right into dimensions of organizational justice, explore building a trusting culture, discuss navigating conflict and respect, and then finally, look at measuring success. Section 1. The psychological contract. So before an employee even logs into their computer or sits in on their very first meeting, this powerful, completely invisible bond is already established that dictates the terms of their engagement. We call this the psychological contract. By definition, it's an individual's unwritten beliefs, expectations, and obligations regarding the exchange agreement with their employer. And let's just take a second here, because this goes way, way beyond the formal bullet points you'd find in a signed offer letter. Your offer letter lists things like your salary and benefits, right? But the psychological contract, that contains your unwritten beliefs. It's the assumption that, hey, if I consistently work overtime, I'm going to be first in line for a promotion, or that my manager will absolutely step up and have my back if I'm totally overwhelmed. To ground this in established organizational psychology, we can look back to a foundational definition from Rousseau in 1989. They described it simply as an individual's beliefs about the terms of the exchange agreement between employee and employer. And understanding this, it's a massive aha moment for leaders. It validates that these unseen expectations aren't just made up in an employee's head. They are very real, they're binding, and they form the entire lens through which every single company decision is viewed. So how is this invisible contract actually fulfilled in the real world? Well, it happens systematically through three distinct states. First up is mutuality. This is where the employee and the employer actually share the exact same beliefs about the terms. Next is alignment, meaning both parties genuinely have matching goals. And finally, reciprocity, that vital sense that there's an equal, fair exchange happening over time. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is that clear, consistent communication from HR and management is literally the only way to achieve mutuality. If you aren't actively talking about expectations out loud, you're just guessing. But what happens when things go sideways? There is a massive difference between a contract breach and a contract violation. A breach is essentially a mismatch of expectations. Say an employee didn't get assigned to that big project they thought they were promised. It's confusing, sure, and it usually prompts them to seek information and ask some pointed questions. But a violation? That is a severe emotional betrayal, and it leads directly to deep resentment. Think about really tough times, like organizational restructuring or sudden pay reductions. If the procedures leading up to those decisions aren't seen as fair, a simple breach of expectations can rapidly escalate into a full-blown psychological violation. Section 2. Dimensions of organizational justice. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it shifts us from the individual's unseen expectations to the broader structural frameworks of fairness that govern the entire organization. When we look closely at fairness, we see it breaks down into four interconnected dimensions. First, you have distributive justice, which is all about the fairness of the actual outcomes and resource distribution. Then, procedural justice focuses on the fairness of the decision-making processes themselves. Next is interpersonal justice, which is literally just how fairly people are treated on a human-to-human level. And finally, informational justice, which looks at the transparency and adequacy of the explanations given for those decisions. These don't just operate in a vacuum. They weave together to form a holistic web of fairness. So, why does this academic framework actually matter in the real world? Well, because high perceived justice directly drives hard business outcomes. When employees feel like they're operating in a genuinely just environment, it massively enhances job performance and engagement. But more importantly, it drives what researchers call organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs. Put simply, this is discretionary effort fueled by fairness. It's an employee voluntarily staying an hour late just to help a new hire figure out the software, or taking on extra work simply to support a struggling teammate. Section 3. Building a trusting culture.
And this brilliantly illustrates how leadership can practically apply these justice concepts to build a sort of protective layer of trust over the whole organization. You see, trust isn't just some magical, warm feeling that just happens. It is a systematic outcome. Looking at this framework, you can trace a direct line from procedural justice straight to organizational trust, which then feeds right into organizational commitment and work engagement. Trust is built through structural actions, consistent policies, and transparent behaviors that are maintained over time.
So, how do we engineer this transparency? First off, establish clear protocols for sharing information. Second, you want to provide what are known as social accounts. This essentially means going out of your way to explain the why behind decisions, not just the what. For example, don't just announce a sudden hiring freeze out of nowhere. Explain the precise financial realities behind why the freeze is happening to protect current jobs. Third, empower your people managers, because employee relations fundamentally start at the manager level. And finally, prioritize facts and data over assumptions. During any period of change, providing clear social accounts is absolutely crucial for keeping that psychological contract intact.
Section 4. Navigating conflict and respect.
Let's pivot for a second to the realities of what happens when trust breaks down and those justice mechanisms fail. When an organization suffers from low perceived justice, the fallout is severe. You start seeing this toxic cause and effect cascade. It usually begins with withdrawal behaviors and decreased job satisfaction. Employees just start creating psychological distance between themselves and their work. Left unchecked, that environment breeds workplace tension, often manifesting as insidious microaggressions. And eventually, it leads to the ultimate system failure: overt discrimination. A breakdown in organizational fairness is the direct catalyst for these highly destructive issues.
Fortunately, the alternative is incredibly uplifting. Robust justice mechanisms create profound psychological safety. Think about it. When employees genuinely perceive fairness in their daily environment, they feel safe to actually speak up. This acts as a powerful systemic antidote to workplace bias and discrimination. It creates a self-reinforcing cycle where problems are identified and resolved proactively, long before they can escalate into massive organizational crises.
Section 5. Measuring employee relations success. All right, time to shift gears. We've talked a lot about conceptual psychology and structural justice, but now, how do we track this stuff with hard metrics and KPIs? If you want to spot red flags early, you absolutely must track these core metrics. First up, employee engagement, which measures the actual energy and connection your people feel. Next is employee satisfaction, which is a crucial signal for predicting retention and internal mobility. And then there's ENPS, or Employee Net Promoter Score, which gauges deep trust and tells you whether your employees would actually advocate for your company as a great place to work.
So the crucial point is this really stark reality right here. According to an HR Acuity benchmark study, only 27% of organizations use employee relations metrics to identify staffing needs. That leaves the vast majority flying completely blind, without the hard evidence needed to justify resources or prove their strategic value. Honestly, it represents a massive missed opportunity to connect the health of your organizational justice directly back to your business outcomes.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a highly actionable framework. If you want to turn raw dashboard data into actual systemic improvement, you need a solid process. Step 1, review these metrics regularly. Don't just let them gather dust in a spreadsheet. Step 2, create an ER scorecard to clearly communicate value. Step 3, constantly reevaluate if they're even tracking the right KPIs. Step 4, share your progress transparently across the entire company. And Step 5, use those insights to drive follow-up actions and secure buy-in from leadership. I want to leave you with a direct challenge. You probably know exactly what your employees do on a daily basis, right? But are you accurately measuring the unseen forces of why they stay, why they trust, or why they leave? The architecture of trust is already built into your organization, whether you are actively managing it or not. It's time to stop guessing and start measuring the deep psychological and justice dynamics in your own workplace. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to take a hard look at your organization's invisible bonds today.